Daniel Gillman with College.town here at the 2026 NCAA Convention in D.C., joined now by the UConn Athletics Director, David Benedict. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, good to be with you.
First off, congratulations on winning the 2025 AD of the Year. We had to start off with a little bit of praise there.
Yeah.
What did that, I guess, mean from a perspective of growth for you over 10 years?
Look, I think it's just a recognition for our university, for the head coaches that I work with, the staff. I mean, it's an individual award, but it really is a representation of what we've all been able to accomplish at UConn. I mean, that doesn't happen without the successes that we've had in lots of our programs. So it's a team award. But certainly appreciate it. It means probably more to me because it's a peer type award. So honored. Thrilled about the recognition, but ultimately it's not why I do it. Certainly appreciated, but yeah, look, hey, it's on to next year, and it's what have you done for me lately type of business. So we're working hard to try to continue to have success.
I guess I want to kind of go back to that summer of 2016, right, where you're kind of a fresh athletic director, and the world is so much different than early 2026 now. What would you, I guess, give yourself as advice from 26 to 16 that you feel like changed so much in this sport in terms of leading a school, athletic department-wise?
What has changed so much? I mean, look, I think ultimately the challenge for athletic directors, regardless of whether it's 2016 or 2026, you're constantly having to make decisions, and how you go about that decision-making process, regardless of whether it's make a decision on a coach, whether it's hiring or potentially making a change, whether it's hiring other staff or decisions strategically where you're investing, where you're not investing. I think how you go about making those decisions, who you rely on to be advisors or mentors, is really critical. And I think sometimes, when you're new, you think you own the world and you're going to do everything, but you can't do any of this on your own. So, I'm very fortunate that I can lean on, a handful of people that I know are going to shoot me straight. They're going to give me their opinion that I think is very valuable for various reasons. And, I try to lean on as many people as I can when I'm making really important decisions. But it's a different world, but it's still the same thing. As a leader of these programs, you're putting yourself on the line almost every day in making really difficult, challenging decisions.
I'm sure you've had interviews since the House settlement agreement in the summer, but in terms of from a pure business perspective, kind of what our audience is most curious about, what in your day-to-day changed when it went from third-party NIL to school-administered payments throughout?
I don't know that a lot has changed for us in particular at UConn. Our situation is probably different than others. The revenue, be it externally through the old collective model or now more on campus, for most of us, maybe not all, but for most of us, the money's being derived the same way, whether it's through fundraising or whether it's trying to drive additional external dollars. And so the strategy, the creativity, the time that's required to have success in those areas, none of that has really changed. Obviously, operationally, things are different. I like the fact, I'm more comfortable with the fact that we are more in the driver's seat as it relates to those things, because I think I take it very seriously that if we have a student athlete and we're committed, regardless regardless of if it was the old model or the model today, where it's more direct, if there's a commitment made to a student athlete, we want to live up to it. And when you're not directly involved and you don't necessarily 100% know what those commitments are, it's not something I want to be where people are questioning our integrity. And so, we're very happy that everything that we've committed to since this has gotten started, be it the collective model or now rev share, we've met and delivered on what we've been committed to our student athletes, and we're going to continue to do that. So I don't know if things have changed that drastically. Obviously, dispersing money to student athletes is different, but it's different, but it's the same.
Are there areas where you feel like you can continue to get more in the driver's seat? Like, are there still pockets that you feel like you're out of your control in certain areas of dealing with NIL or student athletes and eligibility or anything like that?
Well, control is, a interesting term in our world. I try to stay focused on the things that I can control, but anymore with the transfer portal, with coaching changes, with, the freedom of movement within college athletics, be it employees or student athletes, control is something that I think you can't necessarily worry about as much. But yeah, no, it's I think at the end of the day, if you get too caught up into all the nuances and you lose sight of what we all got into this business for, which is to try to, support young people, create unbelievable opportunities for them to hopefully transform their own and potentially future generations' lives. If you can stay rooted and grounded in those principles, there's a lot of other stuff to the side, but if you can stay rooted and grounded there, then usually you can smile at the end of the day about what you're doing. But yeah, there's a lot in between.
We mentioned the transfer portal and something that's gone on here this week at the convention in some of the lesser, paid attention to sports are the changes in the calendar with the transfer portal that passed yesterday with a couple of Olympic sports and opening up the stretches when a coach leaves and all of that. What's your stance on some of the movements that we've seen here this week, whether it be calendar wise or other hubbub in the area?
Yeah, I don't know if I've been able to sit down because a lot of times this stuff just pops out. You don't know sometimes that some of these things are even being discussed. Being outside the Power Four structure, so to speak, you're typically not at the table for these types of things, so you're hearing a lot of stuff, secondhand. So yeah, we'll get down and certainly look at and try to understand and make sure we're appreciative of the changes. I think from my own experience, having gone through the situation, I guess what would have been about a year and a half ago, where Coach Hurley was being courted by the Lakers. That was a unique situation that I'm not sure this most recent change in the portal and the timing of how that works for a basketball program that loses their head coach. At the time, it was not the normal cycle of when you lose a coach to another university. This was much later. And so contemplating losing a coach at that time in the cycle when recruiting is over, like the portal's done, the high school recruiting is done, and the idea that you could potentially lose your entire team really was a daunting, scary proposition because, and I think your ability to go out and recruit a coach when they know the situation is like, okay, wait, I have no really ability to recruit anybody, and I potentially could lose my entire team. how does that work? And so I do think that there are times that we make these decisions, and I include we. I'm not a part of most of them, but I'll say we because I'm a part of this organization. So I'm not going to point the finger at people, but we make a lot of decisions that we don't think about the real downstream impacts. And I know that might be an extreme, unusual situation. And thank goodness I don't think we've had anyone yet put in that position. But that would really be unfortunate that you put a program in a situation where they really have no ability to build a team. And I don't think we should have rules that put people or programs in that kind of situation. Freedom of movement is fine, and we should define what that looks like down the road. But literally creating a set of rules that potentially could destroy a program is also, I don't think, reasonable. So we have to continue to evaluate and tweak things. And again, I'm not suggesting that everyone is perfect or these decisions are all going to be perfect, but where we know things don't make sense, we should quickly try to rectify them in a way that improves the situation.
Seems so pragmatic, right? Well said.
I try to be.
When it comes to rules, sitting down now with someone on the athletics eligibility committee, I want to dive into my conversation with President Baker yesterday, where he made it very clear, and you wonder how long that'll hold up. But for now, it sounds like a James Nnaji situation, getting drafted in the NBA, but not signing an NBA contract, being a member of the G League. He's sitting the bench was kind of the quote. If you sit on the bench and you never play in the NBA and you don't have a contract, you can come back and play NCAA. I would love your take on the whole situation.
Yeah, listen, there's always individuals that sit around and think about the loophole or trying to thread the needle, and certainly in this situation, it seems like this was a loophole or a thread the needle type situation. But I think it should cause people to think about, okay, so you have a situation, and, we have a lot of rules that may have been more applicable for things in the environment 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but things have changed dramatically. And my perspective on this is, regardless of whether it's from a pre-enrollment standpoint, post-enrollment standpoint, international, domestic situation, if you declare yourself draft eligible, then everyone should be treated the same. And so if an international kid or a domestic kid declares themselves draft eligible, whether they're drafted or not, there should be the same rule that applies. You either have the right to retain your eligibility or you give it up, you forego it. Right now we have a situation that is different for those two sets. Our kids on our campus, if they decide to declare themselves, they're foregoing their ability to continue to compete collegiately. I don't think it's appropriate to have a situation where someone that has been playing maybe similar level internationally can declare themselves for the draft, see if they can get drafted, see what their value is, and still contemplate whether or not they want to go play collegiately, where our kids don't have the ability to make that same decision. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that it should be one way or the other relative to we should allow it or not allow it. What I'm saying is we should be treating people equally. And the environment's different, times are different. That is a rule that needs to be addressed. And I don't think it's fair to our kids domestically that they have to forego their rights to be able to continue to play collegiately if they declare themselves for the draft. If other kids that have never enrolled in college, that all they've been doing is playing basketball, get to do both. I think it's unreasonable. So, from my chair, and so
You make good points. Yeah.
whether that supports President Baker's thoughts or not, I think what he's saying is you can't be drafted or play in the NBA and come play collegiately. Well, we're not even giving our kids domestically that opportunity, but yet we have a rule that says from a pre-enrollment standpoint you can't. And I'm sure the NBA will have an opinion on this, because I'm sure at least in the current structure, they're not operating like ice hockey is, where or even baseball, they're drafting kids out of high school, they own their rights for a certain period of time. Maybe things will evolve for the NBA, but I think we need to work together. I think we need to treat everybody reasonably, and there should be equity within that.
Purely from an eligibility perspective, could it affect other sports, like more individual sports, tennis, golf, things like that? Volleyball maybe, where you can go and test the waters internationally and then come back and play in college. It's all very nuanced, it feels like.
Yeah, it is. And I think, we had some conversation, the last couple of days about that. Is it reasonable to think that you can treat everybody the same? There is so many differences. We are talking about lots of different, professional sports that are managed completely different. Is it reasonable to think that we can come up with a similar framework of rules that apply equally to all, sports that we sponsor? I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit pie in the sky for me to think that. But I think there is far too much difference in how we treat various sports. And I think we've made decisions within the last couple years that we felt like the inequity on how we treat programs dissimilarly, whether it's scholarships, whether it's whatever it might be, where we've said, hey, this isn't right, we can't and shouldn't keep doing this. Well, I think there's a broader context of rules that need to be looked at in the same vein, and I believe those things are being reviewed. I just think where we know something is out of line, we should change it as quickly as possible and rectify it. The challenge is that in the litigious environment that we live in, so much of this is looked at through the viewpoint of, well, what's going to create, more legal liability for us, and I understand that, but at some point in time, we got to start doing the right thing.
Well, I want to wrap up with a UConn specific question, and with all of the college football playoff conversations around the independents versus the conferences, has it created a Husky conversation about leaving the independent side of football?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great question. I think college football is in a unique. It's in a unique place. I think, the college football playoff this year is probably as good as I can ever remember it, relative to, we've really had some unbelievable games throughout this college football playoff. Viewership is, as good as it's been. So that means interest is high. I think that there's more opportunity for college football, whether it's you want to put the labels of the P4 and the G6 or whatever you want to call it. I think there's opportunity to evolve more, and whether that's a larger playoff, how does access work? Should access be granted to the G6? I'm not an individual that while I would consider myself as competitive as anybody, the realities around trying to compete with programs that are spending $50+ million more than you are minimum, whether that be rev share or just coaching salaries, recruiting, what have you. Is it really realistic to think that you can compete on a level playing field? and potentially win a national championship. I think the conversation around, should there be a secondary playoff? How would that work? Does that mean you eliminate access for the best G6 team? I'm not saying that. If you want to go travel to one of the top seeds and never get a home game and try to go beat David and Goliath, I'm for it. But to have as many really quality G6 teams that there are, to have the opportunity to compete in a playoff type format for a national championship, I think it's a worthy conversation. And so, for UConn, we made the decision to go independent when we did. There was more of us around at that point in time. As things typically do, they evolve. Now it's just us and Notre Dame. I would say that we're in a very unique position because we are the only independent outside of Notre Dame. Notre Dame has a seat at the table in the CFP. We do not. I don't know that most people know this, but independents get a fraction of the distribution financially that the G6 as well as the P4 get. I'm not suggesting we should get the same amount of money that Notre Dame does, but we have no representation. There's not a conference commissioner or any individual that represents UConn's interest or the previous independents that were around, and therefore we have no representation. And that means our access is limited. We don't get the same type of distribution, and it kind of reminds me of a lot of the things that the NCAA gets sued for and loses. And I'm not suggesting that we're going to file a case against the CFP, but it's not right. And without any representation, no one cares about us and no one represents us. And we're investing at an extremely high level in football. We're very competitive within the G6. We've had really good years over the past 4 years, been to 3 bowl games in 4 years.
Sounds like an incentive to join a conference, though, everything you've laid out.
Well, no doubt. And so that could be something that drives us in that direction. But the point is if independence is a path that is available, then why should it be that you're treated disparately from everybody else? And if it's not, then no one should be independent, and you should be required to be in a conference if you want to participate. But that's not the rule either.
Right.
And so, look, it's a very interesting set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. The Power Four conferences have all gone to 9-game conference schedules. You start reading things today. Well, hey, look, the future could be we're just going to play each other in our own conferences. No more non-conference games. So, look, we constantly say this at UConn. We have to continue every day to evaluate and understand what's going on around us, and have the appropriate conversations so that when the opportunity or the necessity demands that we make a different decision, we will be ready for that.
David, thanks for sitting down and deep diving into some of these topics with me.
Hey, look, I appreciate you having me. It's just one man's opinion. I say this on a regular basis to people. I just hope that over the next 4 or 5 years, the collective group, the leadership within the NCAA, all of us that are representing the member institutions, we got to get better, and we got to leave this thing in a better place than many of us found it when we found ourselves in these leadership roles. And anything that I can do to be a part of that, I'm certainly willing.
Congrats on the continued success.
Thank you.